All right, get ready to dive into the wild world of GTA real estate. 20 fresh articles, curated by the one and only Minaj Aitri.
A lot to unpack there.
Oh, absolutely. To help us navigate it all, I've got a real estate expert with me. This deep dive is for you, whether you're buying, selling, investing, or renting in the GTA.
It's wild market out there.
It is, and we're diving right in, starting with those new mortgage rules. This article, New Mortgage Rules Every Home Buyer Should Know About. It's a game changer. Like, the potential return of the 30-year amortization, I mean, wow.
That's a big one, especially for first-time buyers. Imagine stretching those mortgage payments over 3 decades. It could really help with affordability.
For sure, but I'm guessing there are some downsides to consider, right?
Well, you're right. There's always a trade-off. Longer amortization means you pay more interest over time. Buyers need to really do their homework, look at their situation.
It's that balance, right? Monthly affordability versus the long game, kind of like choosing between, I don't know, a quick sugar rush or a meal that sustains you.
Exactly, and there's more to it than just the 30-year amortization. That insured mortgage cap, it's going up to $1.5 million, meaning buyers needing mortgage insurance can borrow more, in a competitive market.
More borrowing power. Sounds tempting, but could that lead to higher demand and push prices even higher? Fueling the fire, so to speak.
That's the worry, isn't it? This market is really sensitive to anything affecting affordability demand. Combine this rule with those Bank of Canada interest rate cuts, could get crazy.
Speaking of those rate cuts, there's this article, Home buying activity is on the up, but don't expect another boom yet. Seems a bit cautious.
It is. George Hugh makes a good point, though. Lower rates don't always equal a boom. Inventory, the economy, consumer confidence, it all plays a part.
So many variables, it's like trying to predict the weather.
That's a great analogy. And this new mortgage rules article, it also talks about the updated definition of a first-time home buyer. Now, even if you've owned before, you might still qualify under certain conditions.
Oh, interesting. So who exactly fits into this new definition?
It's broader now. People who haven't owned in, say, the past 4 years, or those who've, gone through a separation, trying to make those first-time buyer benefits available to more Canadians.
So someone who sold their place 5 years ago could potentially get those 30-year benefits. A second chance, almost.
You could say that. But even with these new rules, all these potential advantages, it's crucial for buyers to be smart about it. Don't get caught up in the hype. Think about your own situation, your goals. Like George Hughes said, home buying activity is on the up, but don't expect another boom yet. Stay level-headed.
Slow and steady wins the race, as they say. Speaking of different paces, let's talk renting. This article, here's how much you need to earn to afford rent in Toronto versus other GTO spots in November. It's surprising. Toronto rents are declining for the 5th month in a row.
Not what you expect from the Toronto rental market, is it? What's interesting is Toronto's cooling, but other GTA areas are seeing rents rise.
Like Markham. Markham overtaking Toronto in average rent. $2,397 for a one-bedroom in Markham, compared to $2,177 in Toronto. That's a big shift.
It is. Maybe it's demand shifting, people wanting more space, maybe better affordability outside the core. Or maybe Toronto just has more supply now.
Makes you wonder how rentals fit into the bigger housing picture. Home buying activity is on the up, but don't expect another boom yet, mentioned CMHC, predicting new home price highs by 2026. Even with the current slowdown, growth is expected.
Right. Real estate is cyclical. These cooling periods, they often come before growth. It's all about understanding the cycles, what drives them.
Like riding a wave, knowing when to paddle, when to hang 10, when to brace for impact. But amidst these market trends, there are people really struggling with affordability. This article, Priced at a Rental Market, Ontario Senior Lives in Her Shed. It's a tough read. A Midland senior living in a shed due to unaffordable rent and mold.
A stark reminder that affordability isn't just numbers, it has real consequences. This story and the insights from the National Institute on Aging highlight the need for change, for solutions addressing senior housing.
We need affordable options. Support systems for vulnerable populations. Speaking of action, Toronto's new anti-rent-eviction bylaw, detailed in Toronto tightens rental rules with anti-rent-eviction measures. It's cracking down on those shady rent-evictions, landlords using renovations to push out tenants and raise rents.
Definitely a step towards fairness. Landlords now need a special license before doing major renovations that displace tenants.
So no more quick paint job and calling it a major reno. Landlords will actually have to prove the work is extensive enough to justify displacing tenants.
Exactly. Closing those loopholes. And there are protections for tenants during these renovations.
Like what kind of protections?
Landlords have to offer comparable temporary housing at similar rent or pay the difference if the tenant finds their own place.
No more scrambling for a place to live or paying crazy rent while your unit's under construction. A big win for tenant rights. But I'm sure not everyone's happy about this bylaw.
You're right. The article mentions concerns from investors, saying these regulations, the added costs, might discourage investment in rentals, could lead to fewer units, a tighter market. It's complex.
Always a balancing act, right? Protecting tenants while keeping the rental market healthy. Speaking of balancing acts, let's zoom out to the Canadian housing market. Fotch. Canadian home sales break cold streak in October, a sign of life after a bit of a lull.
The numbers are encouraging. Sales in October at levels not seen since April 2022. Looks like those lower interest rates are tempting buyers back.
Like moths to a flame. Lower rates, they always draw in a crowd. But more sales means fewer homes available. Are we heading back to a seller's market?
Maybe, but too soon to say for sure. The article does point out that, well, the sales to new listings ratio is getting tighter, but CMHC is reporting a potential for increased supply from rising mortgage delinquencies. Could moderate price increases. It's a lot of push and pull.
So, more fails, but also the possibility of more properties on the market because of these delinquencies. Both Foch, Canadian home sales break cold streak in October, and growing distress in Canada condos turns lenders into developers. Talk about this trend. What's going on with these delinquencies? How could they affect the market?
Basically, with rates going up, some homeowners are struggling with their mortgage payments. More delinquencies, especially in condos where some developers are having trouble finishing projects, repaying loans. In some cases, lenders are taking over properties, becoming developers themselves, trying to salvage the situation.
Lenders turned accidental developers, huh? What could this mean for the market?
Potentially more condo units hitting the market, affecting supply, prices. But delinquencies, while concerning, don't necessarily mean a crash. It's a situation to watch closely.
So many layers to this market. Canadian inflation surprises higher. Property taxes soar most since 1992. That's another layer, doesn't it? Soaring property taxes, affordability taking another hit.
Property taxes are a big expense for homeowners, and they're at their highest levels since, well, 1992. Adding to those affordability struggles.
1992 feels like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
Any connection to what's happening today?
Back then, Canada was coming out of a recession, high interest rates. Sound familiar? We're seeing something similar now, inflation, rising rates. This article points out that property taxes, they lag behind economic trends. So home prices might have peaked, but those higher values are now reflected in assessments, meaning higher taxes.
Like aftershocks, huh? The initial impact is over, but the tremors continue. What can be done about these rising taxes?
Tough question. Policymakers need to find ways to control spending, look for other revenue sources, reduce reliance on property taxes.
A tough nut to crack. And while we're talking affordability, it's interesting to think about inheritances. Post-haste, how much can the average inheritance help young homebuyers? Dives into this transfer of wealth and how it could affect the market. Boomers passing down their wealth, could it help younger generations get into the market?
It could be a big help, especially for down payments or qualifying for mortgages. The article looks at how this influx of inheritance money could impact affordability, market dynamics, particularly in certain regions, could shake things up.
A wild card in the mix.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on, let's talk about the Landlord and Tenant Board, LTB backlog. Both TREB releases report, Breaking the Backlog, Restoring Fairness and Justice to Ontario's Landlord and Tenant Board, and 21st Nov 2024 TREB, Breaking the Backlog NOV Outline.pdf, discuss the LTB and its problems.
Frustrating for everyone involved. TREB's report shows a massive backlog, over 53,000 unresolved disputes. Landlords can't recover rent, tenants are stuck in unsafe conditions while they wait. It's a mess.
That's a huge number. What's causing this backlog?
The report points to the switch to virtual hearings during the pandemic, technology problems, inconsistent staffing of adjudicators, no clear timelines. It's a bottleneck.
Outdated tech, staffing issues, lack of structure. Not a good combination. The report mentions some real-life examples, right? The human cost of these delays.
Yeah, one example is a small landlord waiting over a year to recover $35,000 in unpaid rent. Imagine that financial strain. Then there's a tenant who had to live in unsafe conditions for years waiting for a hearing. These delays can be devastating.
The system needs fixing, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What's TRAB suggesting?
They want in-person hearings back to improve access and work around the technology limitations. Also, modernize the LTB's technology to streamline things.
So addressing the human and tech sides of the problem, what about the staffing and timeline issues?
They recommend stricter timelines for resolving cases and making sure there are enough adjudicators, no more bottlenecks from vacancies, practical solutions.
Sounds comprehensive. Has the government responded to these suggestions?
There is some good news. The article mentions that the Ontario government has partially accepted some of TRF's recommendations. They're taking it seriously.
A good first step. It's encouraging to see the government acknowledging the problem and working towards solutions. Now, before we move on, let's take a break from the legal complexities and talk about something a little different, the missing middle in housing.
The missing middle, that often overlooked segment, between single-family homes and those massive high-rises. Townhouses, duplexes, low-rise apartments, housing that offers more variety and price points.
Right. We hear a lot about how important the missing middle is for affordability, for creating those diverse, vibrant neighborhoods. What's the situation in the GTA?
The GTA, especially Toronto, doesn't have enough missing middle housing. This lack of diversity contributes to affordability problems, limits choices for families looking for alternatives to detached homes or high-rises.
Like a menu with only two options when people want more choices. So how do we get more missing middle housing built?
Zoning regulations are a big factor. Many neighborhoods have rules that only allow single-family homes. That blocks missing middle development.
Changing the rules, so to speak. But there's also the community pushback, right? People resist change, especially in their neighborhoods.
Of course. Densification, neighborhood character, traffic, these are common concerns. Community engagement is key.
Open conversations, addressing concerns, finding ways to integrate new housing types that benefit everyone, like fitting a new puzzle piece into an existing puzzle. It takes time and collaboration.
Exactly. And speaking of fitting things together or not, let's talk about short-term rentals. This story, couple's home was listed as an Airbnb rental. Only problem, they didn't list it, is a bit unnerving. A Thornhill couple found their home listed on Airbnb without their knowledge.
That's straight out of a nightmare. Imagine seeing your own home listed on Airbnb.
It happened to this couple. Fake reviews, photos that weren't even their property, raises questions about Airbnb's verification process.
Feels a bit like the Wild West of the internet sometimes. What did the couple do?
They tried to get Airbnb to take down the listing, but it was a fight. Airbnb seemed more concerned with verifying their ownership than removing the listing. They went to the media, and finally, Airbnb suspended the fake host.
It shouldn't take media attention to get action. Airbnb needs to be more accountable. This story is a warning, a reminder to be vigilant.
Definitely. Platforms like Airbnb offer convenience, flexibility, but there are risks. Users need to be aware and protect themselves.
And this raises questions about the legality of short-term rentals. The article mentions Toronto has regulations, but Markham, where this couple lives, bans Airbnbs outright. A bit of a patchwork of rules across the GTA.
It's complicated. Some municipalities see short-term rentals as good for tourism, income for homeowners. Others worry about housing availability, neighborhood changes, safety.
It's like a maze. Finding the right balance between innovation and protecting residents is a challenge.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing conversation and takes careful thought and collaboration to find solutions.
For sure. Now let's switch gears and talk about ELOC borrowing. Canadian ELOC borrowing is back, rising nearly as fast as mortgages. It's a trend that's been making headlines.
HELOCs, home equity lines of credit, tapping into your home's equity. They've been popular for years, and now they're back in the spotlight.
People are using their home equity even with these higher interest rates. What's driving that?
A few things. ELOCs usually have lower rates than credit cards or personal loans. Consumer confidence is up, and people still see real estate as a good investment.
Even with the market cooling, they're banking on their home's long-term value. It's like saying, I can't sell for top dollar now, but I can still use my home's value to achieve other goals.
Exactly. Renovations, debt consolidation, investments. But like any borrowing, there are risks. The article warns against over-leveraging, taking on too much debt.
Like walking a tightrope, you need balance, awareness of your limits. ELOCs can be useful, but borrow responsibly.
Absolutely. Speaking of responsibility, let's circle back to affordability. Canadian inflation surprises higher, property taxes soar, mostly, since 1992, was a stark reminder that rising property taxes are eroding affordability.
Double whammy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rising home prices, A&D, rising taxes. 1992 feels like a long time ago. What's the connection to today?
Well, back in 1992, we were coming out of a recession with high interest rates. Sounds familiar. We're in a similar situation now. Inflation, rising rates. The article explains that property taxes are a lagging indicator. So home prices might have peaked, but those higher values are now showing up in assessments, leading to higher taxes.
Like the aftershocks of an earthquake. The initial impact is over, but the tremors linger. What can be done about this?
It's complicated. Policymakers need to find ways to control municipal spending and explore different revenue sources to reduce reliance on property taxes.
A tough challenge. Now, switching gears a bit, there's a great story here. Toronto nonprofit launches program to help homeless youth find work. It shows how communities can make a difference.
It's inspiring. This nonprofit understands that tackling homelessness is about more than just shelter. It's about empowering people, giving them skills and support to escape poverty and build a better life.
It's about giving them a hand up, not just a handout. Job training, mentorship, support for stable employment and housing. What kind of results are they seeing?
The article mentions that the program has been very successful. Many participants have found jobs and permanent housing. It proves that the program works and that believing in people makes a difference.
It's a story of hope. Reminds us that even with these complex social challenges, there are people working hard to make things better. Now, before we move on, let's take a moment to reflect on the range of topics we've covered.
We've looked at mortgages, rentals, affordability, homelessness. It shows how interconnected these issues are. Understanding the real estate market is about more than just numbers and trends. It's about people's lives, their hopes, their struggles.
Very well said. Let's dive into another important topic, the Ontario government's plans for affordable housing, as outlined in Ontario government announces plans to build more affordable housing units.
Affordable housing, a challenge for cities across Canada. This article highlights the provincial government's plan to increase the supply of affordable housing units.
So they're acknowledging the problem and taking action. What's their plan?
It's a multi-pronged approach, with incentives for developers to build affordable units, a streamlined approval process, and investments in programs to support those experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity.
A collaborative effort between the government, nonprofits, and the private sector. But building more units is just one piece of the puzzle, right? What about the support systems people need?
Exactly. It's not just about a roof overhead. It's about healthcare, childcare, job training, those essential services that help people thrive.
Building communities, not just housing units.
Now, before we get to the last few articles, let's appreciate the incredible diversity of topics we've explored in this deep dive so far.
From mortgages and rentals to affordability, homelessness, and transportation, it's a lot. It shows that the real estate market is more than just bricks and mortar. It's about the social, economic, and environmental forces that shape our city.
Absolutely. And it's constantly evolving. Staying informed is crucial for making smart decisions, whether you're buying, selling, investing, or just trying to understand your community.
Well said. Before we move on, it's great to see the range of perspectives and experiences reflected in these articles.
From real estate intricacies to social issues and cultural celebrations, they offer a glimpse into the heart of Toronto.
They paint a picture of a city that's evolving, facing challenges, embracing opportunities, and working towards a better future for everyone.
Absolutely. Toronto's story is still being written, and we all have a role to play in its next chapter. It really is. And speaking of that dynamic market, this next article, "This is how much money you need to make to buy a house in Canada's largest cities," gives us a reality check. It breaks down the income you need to buy a house in different cities.
The age-old question, right? How much do I need to make to buy a house? I'm sure our listeners are all ears.
Oh, it's a question on everyone's mind. And this article, well, it has some eye-opening numbers. Home prices might have eased a bit in some places, but you still need a significant income to get into the market. Like in Toronto, the average household income needed to buy is now over $200,000.
Over $200,000, that's a lot. Even with prices dipping, homeownership is still a dream for many.
It is. And don't forget, that figure includes things like the mortgage stress test, checking if you can handle higher interest rates. So even if you think you can afford the payments now, the stress test might say otherwise.
That stress test, it's a dose of reality. Make sure you're not overextending yourself. Speaking of market activity, national home sales surged in October after previous month's supply bump. CREA caught my eye. Seems like the Canadian market is waking up.
It does. Sales in October were at levels we haven't seen since early 2022. Those lower interest rates, they're drawing buyers back in.
A shot in the arm for the market. The article also mentions a supply bump the month before. What does that mean exactly?
It means more homes were listed for sale in September, a little boost in inventory. But that October sales surge, well, it suggests buyers snap those up quickly.
So demand outpacing supply, even with that temporary increase. Classic recipe for higher prices. Let's shift back to Toronto. There's this report, Toronto Rental Market Report reveals affordability crisis, calls for policy changes.
Sounds pretty dire.
It is. This report digs deep into the rental affordability crisis in Toronto. Rising rents, low vacancy rates, more and more renters struggling to make ends meet.
A tough situation, especially with the cost of living rising everywhere. What did the report find? Well, the average rent for a one-bedroom in Toronto is now over $2,500 a month, out of reach for many. And the vacancy rate is still incredibly low, around 1%, a tight market with few options.
Those numbers are concerning. What's causing this rental crunch?
It's a mix of things. The population's growing, especially downtown. We're not building enough new rentals. And with buying a home so expensive, more people are renting, which drives up demand and pushes rents higher.
Supply and demand at play. What solutions does the report propose?
It calls for a multifaceted approach. Build more purpose-built rentals, protect tenants from unfair rent hikes and evictions, and offer financial help to those struggling.
A reminder that a healthy rental market needs a balance between supply and demand. Investing in infrastructure is investing in our well-being. And with that, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the GTA real estate market. I want to thank Manoj Attri for curating these fantastic articles. He's a great resource for anyone interested in real estate.
He is. He's given us so much to think about, covering everything from market trends and challenges to opportunities and inspiring stories.
It's been a great conversation. To our listeners, remember that staying informed is key in this market. Whether you're buying, selling, or just curious, knowledge is power. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.